I'm Reverend Kim Polchow. Welcome to Having Men for Dinner. This is episode 3, part 1. We're going to talk about Esther. How many times have I quoted the book of Esther to someone who was struggling and not even thought about the background of it? There's this one really quotable line in Esther. Here it is in the NRSV. Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. This is such a popular scripture, particularly with women, to say to each other in times of struggle. But, you know, we're just saying to people, I know you're in a tough spot, but maybe God put you in this challenging spot for a reason. The book of Esther would not say it the way I just did, that maybe God put us in that spot to work something, because the book of Esther doesn't use the word God. The entire book of Esther does not mention God. Can you believe that? It's a book of the Bible that doesn't directly talk about God. But it does talk about the Jewish people, and it is the foundation story for the Jewish holiday of Purim, or the Festival of Lots. And it's one of the stories that fits the pattern put forth by Nicole Wilkinson Duran in her book, Having Men for Dinner, Biblical Women's Deadly Banquets. And it might be the one that has the most impact for us today. What do we know about Esther? So the book of Esther starts with a banquet and a woman, which goes right along with our pattern, right? Judith had a banquet. Jael, well, we had the water and milk thing. In Esther, we start with a banquet, but the woman is not Esther. Her name is Queen Vashti. She's the queen of Persia. The king, Ahasuerus, is holding a banquet for the men, and she is holding a banquet for the women, the nobles of the kingdom. And here they are together showing off their wealth to all the other nobles. Now, the king considers Vashti's beauty part of his great wealth, so he summons her to come to his banquet wearing her crown. We don't know if she was supposed to wear anything else when she came. Queen Vashti refuses to come to his banquet. The king's advisors go nuts. Not only is this bad for the king, this is bad for all men. What will happen when the other nobles hear about her refusal? What will happen when the commoners hear of this refusal? Oh my gosh, there's going to be an epidemic of women walking around doing what they want, not doing what their husbands tell them to do, or saying, I can't, I'm washing my hair tonight. Honey, I have a headache. They decide they must act quickly. So they draw up something for the king to sign that throws her out of his presence forever and declares that all wives must obey their husbands. He signs it, but then he kind of regrets it because, he misses her. So the advisors tell him he ought to summon all the beautiful virgins in the land to come audition for him. He can then pick which one pleases him enough to be queen. Anyone else wondering at this point how this story made it into the Bible? Esther gets summoned because she's a beautiful virgin living in Persia. She's also Jewish, but no one seems to know this except her uncle/guardian, Mordecai. And he warns her not to tell anyone that she's Jewish. They don't reveal their Jewishness to anyone through their actions because they're apparently not all that observant. If you remember back to Judith managed to bring her food along by claiming she needed to keep kosher. Esther doesn't talk about being kosher. There's no place for kosher food in this story. When Esther goes to the palace, she's favored by one of the eunuchs who watches over the harem. He makes sure she gets the proper treatment and knows what will please the king when her night comes, which it does in about a year. King Ahasuerus digs her big time and decides to name her queen, of course, not knowing she is Jewish. Around the same time, 2 men grow to be larger characters in this story. Number 1, Mordecai, her guardian, hears of a plot against the king, tells Esther, who tells the king about the plot against him, and the king makes a note in his record that this came from Mordecai through Esther. And number 2, Haman, an advisor to the king, who is his right-hand man. The king orders that everyone should bow when they see Haman. And if you're getting Daniel echoes here, Yeah, that would make sense. Mordecai refuses to bow down when he sees Haman. When people ask him about it, it's suggested that he confesses he's Jewish to explain his lack of bowing down. But this is a strange suggestion because Jewish law doesn't prohibit people from bowing down to leaders. It prevents them from bowing down to other gods. So, Haman's not a god. He's just a guy in charge. When Haman hears that Mordecai is not bowing and he's not because he's Jewish, he decides to punish all Jewish people in the kingdom. So he talks the king into calling for the deaths of all the Jewish people on a certain auspicious day. Now, this king can be talked into anything, basically, and he agrees. He signs an edict, and he has it posted in all the languages of Persia. And of course, the Jewish folks freak out. Mordecai goes to Esther and tells her to fix it. She says she can't because, the thing with the scepter, the king has to allow her into his presence, right? So if she comes in and he doesn't want to see her and he doesn't extend the scepter, then, she can die. Her life is on the line. He hasn't asked for her in 30 days. Mordecai lashes into her with this from Esther 4, verses 13 to 14. And you will find this, if you want to read along, linked in the show notes as the worksheet for this episode. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter. But you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. Here's another big thing. We should know the context of the Bible verses we quote to someone when they're struggling, because sometimes the sweetest sounding verse is actually just a line in a guilt trip or a diatribe. So the Jewish people in Persia fast and pray for her. She approaches the king, who advances his scepter and asks what she wants. She invites the king and Haman to a banquet that night. So instead of asking for the salvation of her people, she invites them to a banquet. They agree. She's all hospitable. Everything's great at the banquet. The king asks what she really wants, and she says, "Why don't you come back tomorrow for another banquet, and I'll tell you." That night, Haman goes home boasting about how much the king loves him, but how it mortifies him to keep seeing Mordecai around, refusing to honor him. And on the advice of his wife and friends, he orders a huge gallows built on which to have Mordecai hanged at his earliest possible convenience. On that same night, the king can't sleep. He goes through his notes, and he realizes he never rewarded Esther's uncle or guardian, Mordecai, for saving his life. He asks Haman in the morning, hypothetically, what he should do to honor a man who has served him very well. Haman gives him a nice answer, thinking that this honor will be for Haman himself. Of course, it's not. It's for Mordecai. So Haman spends the day on which he wanted to have Mordecai hanged honoring Mordecai as he himself wanted to be honored. So there's some bitterness going on here. The story is going to climax where it started, with a woman throwing a banquet. We know we have almost all of the pieces we need for a biblical woman to commit murder. We have a powerful foreign male enemy, although, Esther is technically the foreigner. The foreigner from the Jewish perspective would be Haman. Haman is the powerful one. We have a particular situation with the husband, right? He's the king, and he is really easy to convince. We have food and drink offered as hospitality with these banquets in succession, and all we're missing is sexual tension and the actual murder, but the story isn't finished. So Haman comes home from honoring Mordecai just in time to change for Queen Esther's banquet. When the king asks what she wants, she says she and her people have been sold out for destruction by someone. The king demands to know who did it. And she says, a foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman. Well, the king walks out to take a breather and think about this in the garden. Haman throws himself on Esther, beseeching her to save him. The king walks in, sees Haman draped across her, and accuses him of molesting his wife, the queen. And there is our sexual tension. A eunuch quite helpfully reports that Haman has a gallows ready to go at his own house, and the king has him hanged on his own gallows. So there's your story. There's the last piece. There's the murder. It's less direct, right? There's no tent peg. There's no using his own sword. But she did sort of hoist him on his own petard, so to speak, because she's able to get her husband to murder him using the weapon of destruction he had created for her uncle. Oh, it's interesting. The story of Esther ticks all the boxes, but it's a little more indirect. Judith in jail pleases a man to kill him, while Esther pleases a man to have him kill another man. Haman's now dead, but there's still an edict ordering the killing of all the Jews in Persia, an irrevocable edict under Persian law. At Esther's urging, the king issues an edict to let the Jewish people arm themselves and fight back, which they do, and they kill lots of Persians in the fighting. Then he asks if she wants anything else, and she says she wants him to kill all 10 of Haman's sons. I love the way the Message translation sums up the attitude in Persia at this point. It says, many non-Jews became Jews. Now it was dangerous not to be a Jew. And the book ends by saying that this is why Jewish people celebrate Purim. Yeah, that's quite a story, isn't it? I'm going to have to be more careful about who I quote Esther to. So that's the end of part 1 of the third episode, which is on Esther. I'm going to come back in the next episode and talk about sort of where do we go with Esther and the rest of these stories? What do we take away from this as disciples of Jesus Christ, as human beings?